2 years had passed since the night of the river watch. The willow hollow still sheltered Maro and her twins, but it no longer echoed with the same warmth. Where once the squeaks of "Mama, look!" and Nox's quiet "Mom" filled the space, the word had hardened into "Mother," a sharper sound, distant even in small voices. Maro noticed a change the first time Thea called out to her from the river bank, pale fur shining in the sun. "Mother, may I go with Fira?" she had asked, tail wagging. The word landed like a stone in Maro's chest. She had not corrected it. She could not. Now it was all they used. The twins spent more of their days away from the hollow, their laughter carried not to her ears, but across the banks where Fira's uneven feathers bobbed through the reeds. The Psyduck had become their anchor as much as each other. Where Thea's brightness sometimes made others wince, Fira met it with giggles and splashing games. Where Nox's silence unsettled the village, Fira tilted her head and simply spoke enough for all three. Together they were inseparable, 3 small figures, always darting into pools, climbing river stones, whispering secrets. When Thea's paws tired, Fira offered her trinkets to distract her. When Nox's quiet weighed too heavily, Fira's bill squeaked against his shoulder until a faint smile cracked his face. Maro watched from a distance. More often than not, her amber eyes followed them as they dashed through shallows or returned dripping with mud. But she rarely joined. Sometimes she scolded sharp words about staying too far, about the river's dangers, about omens the twins could not understand. But the children drifted back to Fira's side as soon as her voice faded. The villagers noticed. They call her Mother, not Mama. They cling to the Psyduck instead. Even the river seems to pull them away from her. At night, when the hollow grew still, Thea curled against Nox and whispered about the day's adventures, her voice soft and rapid. Nox listened, steady as always, adding a word here or there, his muzzle resting lightly against her fur. Sometimes Fira's laughter still echoed in their dreams, pulling them into sleep with warmth that Maro no longer gave. Maro heard it. She turned her back, curling her body to face the hollow's wall. Each night, she told herself the same truth, that this was safer, that if they did not lean on her, then the river could not take them from her. Yet her tail twitched restlessly, and her claws dug grooves in the earth as she fought the ache in her chest. The twins did not see her tears. They only felt her distance. And so they leaned harder on each other and on Fira, growing their own small current apart from her. The sun was high when the twins started into River Glen's heart, Fira waddling fast to keep up. The square was busy, Pokemon carrying baskets of reeds, laying out drying fish, or mending nets strung between poles. Voices mingled with the drone of insects, but they quieted when the children passed. "Mother said we shouldn't go this far," Nox murmured, though his pause didn't slow. "Mother says everything," Thea huffed, darting ahead. Her pale fur caught the light like a spark. "Besides, Fira knows where to go, don't you?" Fira tilted her head, feathers still damp from a splash in the shallows. Maybe I'll forget and we'll end up in the reeds again, she giggled at her own joke, sending a ripple of laughter into Thea's chest. Several villagers watching from their work, paused in repairing a net, eyes narrowing as the children passed. A Lambre muttered to his neighbor, words just loud enough to carry, "Day and night together again, just like the tale." Thea's fins twitched at the whispers. She puffed her chest, trying to look braver than she felt. "They always stare," she muttered to Fira. "Let them," Fira replied simply, tugging a shiny pebble from her feathers and holding it up. "See? They miss all the good things lying around because they're too busy staring." Thea laughed, her tail swishing, while Nox's mouth quirked faintly at the corner. Still, not all stares were quiet. Elder Crest stood near the shade of a storage hut, his pale gold eyes locked on the trio when Thea's gaze brushed his. She froze for half a heartbeat. He said nothing, but the weight of his judgment pressed on her like the river's current at flood. Before she could shrink, Fira waddled right past him, tossing her pebble from one hand to the other. "Hello, Elder," she chirped, utterly unbothered. "Want to see my rock?" A few gasps rippled through the square. Chris's eyes narrowed. His jaw taut, but he gave no reply. He turned sharply, striding toward the river's edge, leaving only silence in his wake. Fira snorted and shoved the pebble into Thea's paw. "See? He doesn't even like shiny things. How boring." Thea burst into giggles, and even Nox let out a quiet, startled huff of amusement. The tension dissolved in their laughter, though the whispers rose again behind them. From the far side of the square, Elder Nettle's vines stirred as she watched, her eyes soft and troubled. Brooke sat beside her, tapping his staff rhythmically. "Do you see it, Nettle?" he murmured. "How the river shifts when children laugh in its face?" Nettle's vines curled together, as though bracing herself. "I see it," she said quietly, "but I fear Crest sees something else entirely." Thea skipped ahead into the open space where the ground dipped toward the river, her paws scattering reeds and pebbles. "Let's play the current game," she declared, spinning in a wide circle until she toppled into the grass. Fira waddled after her, feathers sticking out at odd angles from the spin of her fall. "What's the current game?" she asked, tilting her head so far her bill nearly brushed the dirt. Thea leapt up again, her pale fur catching the sun. "You run in circles and see who can pull the other along without falling." She bounced over to Nox, bumping her forehead into his shoulder. "Come on, you're always good at not falling." Nox sighed, but there was no fight in it. He allowed himself to be tugged into her orbit. "You'll fall first," he said quietly, but there was a flicker of humor in his blue eyes. "Never," Thea squealed. The two spun clumsily, Thea tugging and Nox resisting just enough to steady her. Fira waddled in wide loops around them, her laugh carrying high above the river's hum. Villagers paused at their work to watch, some with faint smiles, others with frowns. A Rosalia whispered to her mate, "Look how they weave, like the currents themselves, chasing and circling. The myth is playing out before us." Nearby, a Goldeen muttered, "Or they're just children, Can't a laugh be just a laugh? But louder than either was the laughter of the trio themselves. Thea toppled at last, landing in the reeds with a squeak of triumph. Nox helped her up without a word, brushing mud from her pale fur with a careful paw. "See?" Feyre announced, flopping onto her back in the grass. "That's the best part of the current game. You always fall. The river makes sure of it." Thea giggled so hard she couldn't speak, and even Nox shook his head, whiskers flicking in quiet amusement. From the edge of the square, Elder Crest stood stiff in the shade, his golden eyes cold. He said nothing, but his presence pressed on the onlookers, souring the air. Elderbrook, perched on a nearby stone, only chuckled under his breath, staff tapping in rhythm with the children's laughter. Elder Nettle's vines shifted in quiet worry, as if trying to shelter the trio from unseen storms. When the sun dipped low and the villagers returned to their homes, the laughter of Thea, Nox, and Feyre still echoed across the water, bright, stubborn, and unafraid. And though Morrow was not there to see it, the whispers of Riverglint grew louder that night. That evening, as dusk draped the river in violet light, Elderbrook rose from his stone and rapped his driftwood staff 3 times against the ground. The sound carried across Riverglint, sharp as a peaky pig's call, and heads turned from hearths and dens. "Come, come," Brooke called, his voice warm and rolling, made to travel. The charms dangling from his leaf brim jingled with each step as he moved toward the central fire pit. The river runs thick tonight, and it whispers for a tale. Children tumbled eagerly toward the clearing, their parents slower but compelled by custom. Storytime was as old as Riverglint. When the elders spoke, no one refused the gathering. Morrow lingered at the edge of the crowd. Thea and Nox pressed close to her paws, Feyre waddling loyally at their side. She shifted uneasily, amber eyes flicking towards the other elders. Nettle settled quietly in the circle, vines coiling like roots. Crest stood with his arms folded, sharp gaze fixed on the fire as though daring it to flicker. Brooke leaned on his staff, waiting until the flames has been coaxed to life. Shadows danced across the gathered faces. His cloudy eyes gleamed in the firelight as he began. "Long ago," he intoned, "the great river flowed whole and unbroken, carrying every song, every dream, every memory. But the stone, heavy with fear, heavy with doubt, fell across its path." He tapped his staff against the ground with each word, the rhythm steady, commanding. The circle fell silent. Even the river itself seemed to hush, listening. "The river split," Brooke continued, "one half flowing into shadow, deep and secretive, the other rushing into light, shallow and sparkling, and the stone mocked them both. You will never meet again." Children pressed close to their parents, wide-eyed. Some whispered the words with him, the lines so familiar they had been etched into their hearts since hatchling. Brooke's voice softened, but his staff tapped louder. Yet downstream, beyond all lands, the currents meet again in the great sea. Day gave sparkle to night, night gave depth to day. They were whole once more. The villagers murmured, some nodding in reverence, but as Brooke paused, his gaze slid, not by accident, to Thea and Nox seated in the fire's glow. The pale one leaned forward, enraptured, while the dark one sat steady and silent, eyes fixed on the flames. Fira nestled between them, her bill squeaking softly as she stifled a giggle at the solemnity of it all. Brooke's smile was faint, unreadable. So the river teaches us division is not a curse, but a journey. Reunion shapes the sea. A hush lingered. The fire crackled, spitting embers skyward. From the far side of the circle, Cress's voice cut sharp into the silence. Or it warns us, for not all currents reunite. Some tear at their banks, dragging what they touch into ruin. The murmurs rose again, uneasy. Thea shifted uncomfortably, her whiskers flicking. Nox leaned closer to her side, silent but watchful. Brooke tapped his staff once, firm but calm. The river tells many versions of this story. Which one it chooses this time? His eyes lingered on the twins once more, glimmering with something gentler. Is not yet written. The circle breathed again, though tension clung like mist. Parents drew their children close, some whispering reassurances, others murmuring prayers. Morrow's tail lashed once behind her. She could feel the weight of every eye on her children, and though she said nothing, her chest burned with a mix of fear and something sharper, something she could not name. Beside her, Thea whispered to Nox, just loud enough for Fira to hear. The stone was wrong. I'll always find you. Nox blinked, his steady gaze softening. I know. Fira snorted, rolling onto her side with a grin. Then I guess I'm the puddle who comes along, too. Thea giggled, and Nox allowed himself a quiet huff of breath. The laughter of three children rose against the firelight, small but bright, defying the heavy silence of myth. When the flames had burned low, and villagers drifted back to their hollows, only the elders remained near the embers. The night pressed close, heavy with the weight of what had been spoken. Nettle stirred first, her vines curling and uncurling in slow, uneasy loops. Brooke, she said softly, why tonight? The river has many stories. Why call for the tale of the currents, then whispers already coil so tightly around the twins? Brooke sat with his staff across his knee, charms tinkling faintly as he tilted his head. His cloudy eyes still glowed with reflective fire. Because, Nettle, when the tale is already being told in hushed voices, it is better to speak it aloud. Better to hold it up to the fire than let it rot in the shadows. Cress's jaw tightened. He stepped forward, his silhouette sharp against the dying flames. You gave them hope, he said flatly. You told the village reunion is possible, that division is no curse. That is not vigilance, Brooke. It is softness. Sooner or later, the river will demand balance, and your words will weaken us. Brooke chuckled. a sound both warm and weary. Softness, he echoed, or simply another current. You always look to the flood, Crest. You forgot the calm that carries us most days. Without it, Riverglint would drown long before the storm. Crest's eyes flashed. And you forget the storm comes because the calm is not guarded. His golden gaze slid towards the Willow Hollow, though Morrow and the children were long gone. I see danger coiling around them already. If she is wise, Morrow will step back further still. If she does not, he let the words trail off, heavy with unspoken judgment. Netto's vines tightened protectively around her body, her voice firmer than usual. They are not danger. They are children, and I will not stand by while fear makes orphans of them in their own mother's den. Brook tapped his staff, the sound steady as rain. Peace, peace. The river speaks in many voices. Perhaps tonight it reminded us that stories can change. He lifted his gaze to the sky, where stars shimmered faintly above the dark current, and perhaps it reminded them. Crest turned sharply, striding into the night without another word. Netto lingered, her vines swaying like reeds in a restless breeze, before slipping away into the shadows. Brook stayed by the embers alone. He turned one of the charms at his brim, a child's shell, worn smooth by years, and whispered to the river, "May they write a kinder ending than the one you've given before." The water murmured back, neither promise nor denial, carrying his words away. The embers were still glowing faintly when Morrow led the twins back to the Willow Hollow. Her steps were brisk, her words clipped, and the weight in her shoulders made the night feel colder. Thyra waddled behind them for a while, but peeled away towards her own den with a soft wave, leaving the twins alone in the hush of crickets and river song. Inside the hollow, Morrow curled in the far corner, her back to them. She offered no words, no touch. Thea and Nox pressed into their moss bed together, waiting until her breath steadied into the shallow rhythm of restless sleep. Only then did Thea whisper. "They were all looking at us." Her voice was tremulous, her pink eyes reflecting the faint starlight that spilled through the roots. "Like we were the story come alive. Like we weren't us." Nox shifted closer, resting his chin on her head. "I know." His tone was steady, but his blue eyes held something sharp. When Brook looked at me, I felt like he wasn't seeing me at all. Just the night current. Thea bit her lip, tail twitching. And me, the day, shallow laughter, bright water, like I'm supposed to be silly and scattered forever. Like that's all I am. Silence stretched. Thea pressed her forehead against her brother's chest, voice muffled. What if they're right? What if that's all we ever are, just parts of a story? Nox was quiet a long while, his small paws smoothing over her back the way Morrow once had, before the coldness set in. "Finally," he whispered, "then we'll make it to our story, not theirs." Thea's breath hitched, then softened with a shaky giggle. "A sparkle, and you'll be steady, and we'll confuse them all." Nox gave the smallest of smiles, hidden in the dark. "Together." Thea yawned, curling closer, her paws gripping his fur, Sleep tugged at her, but before she drifted off, she whispered one last truth. I don't care what the river says. You're not the night. You're my brother. Knox closed his eyes, pulling her close, anchoring her against the weight of the myths outside. And in the willow hollow, while Morrow dreamed uneasily of warnings and floods, the twins dreamed of each other, two small currents, refusing to be anything but one whole.